So a few months back, I had my next guest on the podcast, Todd Palmer, who is an executive coach. He's a speaker. He's a former CEO. Now he helps other people be successful in their businesses. And we clicked really, really well on that call. And I realized that Todd was something special, not your run-of-the-mill business coach, not your run-of-the-mill guy on the speaker circuit, but really a deep, deep individual who really wants to serve people. So Todd said that he was writing a new book and he'd love to come back on the podcast. And I'm like, okay, but we've already covered the ground. Is there going to be anything new that we can talk about? I'm not sure this is the direction I want to take the podcast and all this stuff, but I'm like, but I really love Todd. He's really incredible. So I was like, screw it. Whatever he has to talk about, I want to bring him back. So Todd sends me his book and he says, would you read the book before you come on? And I'm like, okay, great. I'll read another book on entrepreneurship. I'll read another book by another coach saying the same things that I say, or something that other people. But I knew I had to read it because, again, I respect Todd, and I want to do the research for my podcast. So I open up the book and I start reading, and I'm like, holy shit, he wrote something special. Like, this isn't a run-of-the-mill book. I'm learning everything in each chapter. He says things in ways that regular people can get it, not just coachy people. He talks about the how-tos of entrepreneurship, the nuts and bolts, the things that we actually already know that we don't do, that people assume that we're going to go do. And then he talks about the psychology and the humanity behind doing it or not doing it. So it's really ridiculously good. So I want you to go out and buy this book and read the book. It's not that long, and it's packed full of all kinds of stuff. It's called From Suck to Success, a guide for extraordinary entrepreneurship. And Todd Palmer is here with us today.
Oh, Mark, I'll tell you what, if I could just carry you with me wherever I go and have you introduce me anywhere I go, you would be my new best friend. I thank you, first of all, for having me back on your show. Thank you for taking time out of your busy life and your busy schedule to go through the book. And I can't wait to have this conversation. I've been looking forward to this all day.
Good. So before we started, I was telling you how great your book is, and you started telling me how the book came about, and I stopped you and I said, I have to press record. You have to tell everybody how this book came about because it's actually part of why it's special. So tell me about the book and how the different iterations.
Well, so the version of the book that comes out in February of 2021 is the eighth version of the book. It's the eighth version of the book because initially the first version of the book was really more of autobiographical, but from a very family focus. So it was really a love letter to my son, who's now going to be 30 years old this year. And I wanted him to understand maybe some of the things that kids don't understand when parents are entrepreneurs. Your dad's this crazy CEO and he does some of the nonsense that I pulled and the challenges that I put the family through, the stresses I was under. Hence that I think oftentimes because it's work-life integration, wherever I went, there I was. So if I'm stressed at work, I'm stressed at home. So you've got the eighth version of the book. And
now let's clarify. There's not 8 versions out on Amazon. You just kept iterating the book before you turned it in.
Yes, it's the only version that'll be on Amazon. It's the only version that'll be at Barnes and Noble, etc. And it was an iterative learning process for me. And there were stops and there were starts. It took about 5 years to complete. And I can appreciate where you're coming from, where a lot of coaches or CEOs write their autobiography or their top 10 tips for whatever.
Or they write a book specifically so it's a business card.
Right. Yeah. It's a brochure to hand to you as a prospective customer or prospective client.
So it's a wonderful, especially, with self-publishing and everything, it's a wonderful surprise to have someone actually put themselves into a book.
Yeah. And thank you. And for me, it started off like, well, this sounds okay. But then as I read it, like you had the experience, like it doesn't differentiate me in the eyes of the consumer, and it's not really me. And the original title was, a little bit more homogenized, a little more, I guess would call it maybe user friendly. And as I let a couple of trusted people in my network read it, what I kept getting was, this doesn't sound like you. From, very people close to me, people who live in my house, trusted clients, outside advisors. And that really bugged me. And I felt, part of what I talk about is ATV, authenticity, transparency, and vulnerability. And I'm like, I'm not living up to my core values. 12 years ago, when I worked with Simon Sinek, you'd say, where's your why? Where's your purpose? Why isn't that there? So I stopped and I set it down. And I've never told anybody this story. So I started pivoting into reading, watching YouTube, and other things about the creative process. Because as an
Mm.
entrepreneur, I think I had a very linear process. So I started watching things on the Beatles, started watching things about not actors in Hollywood, but the creative process of movie making. I watched biographies on directors because I wanted to see how you really create something organically that has your name on it that you have to live with forever. And so, long story short, we're coming up on the deadline of getting the book done, self-imposed deadline by me. And I'm all of a sudden dragging my feet. And I watched this interview with Paul McCartney. I mean, if you're a Beatle, you're probably pretty cool. And if you're literally the most successful songwriter of all time,
By
I
the way,
want
his
to,
new album is
yeah,
amazing. Like, I'm shocked. It's so
yeah,
good. His voice is kind of shot. So
yeah.
if I were like a modern singer or something, I would steal that catalog because those
Yeah.
songs are so good.
So there you go. So he's in his 70s still writing and creating great material. And I watch this guy who's kind of fanboying all over him, you're Paul McCartney and you wrote the greatest song of all time. You wrote Yesterday. And when you hear that on the radio, do you hear the genius that I hear? And McCartney, without missing a beat, he's like, I hear like three things I would have changed. And I'm like, okay, I'm done. If Paul McCartney cannot be satisfied and he's going to say Yesterday can be improved upon, I need to get this book out there and I need to kind of let it go into the world so that someone like you can read it and receive value of it. Because that's really the purpose behind it. Isn't for me just to be certainly a statement of who I am as a coach, who I am as a leader, who I am as a CEO. Beyond that, it's got to be a value to the person reading it. And so again, thank you so much for your kind feedback.
Cool. So when I first saw the title, I actually didn't like it.
Mm.
I thought, what the hell does that mean? Are you trying to be like Mark Manson or whatever like that? And then I started reading the book. And now I understand what from suck to success means. And I really think it fits the book. So can you explain why you decided on that?
So I love, love, love the fact that you didn't like the title. I've shared the title with a lot of people, and a lot of people don't like the
Oh,
title.
by the way, am I not supposed to be honest?
No, I love it. And here's ultimately why the title is what it is. It's to either attract my ideal client, attract someone who lands with the message, someone who gets it, someone whose internal itty bitty shitty committee is telling them you suck, or I made that decision that sucked, or I've had athletes read it. Like, hey, dude, when you're paid a lot of money and you go 2 for 10, not 3 for 10, you tell yourself you suck, and you're still at the ultimate pinnacle of the sport. So the reason it's from suck to success is I think in order to stand out in a crowded space as a coach, or in order to stand out in a crowded space as a podcaster or an author, I have to show up and be myself. And that means I need to play the music the way I play it, to coach the way I coach, because the way I coach it in what I would call an extraordinary way, in a very singular way, in a very defined way. So for people who've actually seen the title, taken a look at it, and it repels them, I'm really okay with that because it doesn't go to how I show up and how I coach. If the title irritates you, but at least you crack it open and then get sucked in, then I've done my job. Now,
Mm.
there are some people who've like, I love the title and I can't wait to get it, and they want advanced copies, etc. And I've got one person, his name was Mike, and he goes, it's literally become my Bible because my itty bitty shitty committee runs my life, and I want to get out of that doom life. I want to get into your active learning cycle, and I want my business to grow and scale. And I realize it's inside out leadership, and it's me, not anybody else holding me back. That's who the book is for. It's for the individual with self-awareness who sees things in the stories, and there's several in the book, about how if they show up differently and they engage differently with themselves, they can change their external world, whether it's their business, even whether it's their family.
Yeah, so here's where I saw that it fit really well, because I love the whole lying to ourselves that we don't think we suck just doesn't help, right? We have to deal with those thoughts. I was coaching one of my clients this morning, and we put him on the shore watching him beat himself up. Right.
Yeah,
When you can
yeah.
sit on the shore and watch yourself beat yourself up and go, look, there I go again, and then go about your merry business, you've really won. So you put a distinction in the book about the fake it till you make it crowd. And if you need prompts because you wrote the book a while ago, let me know. But can you just talk about the difference between the fake it till you make it and then being a little bit vulnerable?
Well, I think my generation of leaders, we're often start off as rugged entrepreneurialists. We have to be all things, to do all things all the time to start our companies, which for me worked really well. I could be sales, I could be ops,
For
I
a
could be
time,
HR
for a
for a
time.
time
If
until it didn't.
go back to your other podcast interview with me, where we understand that the rugged individual works until it doesn't work.
It really doesn't. So when you're like me and you think you have to have all the answers all the times, what you do, at least what I did, is I start showing up not as my authentic self. So I put my mask up, I put my wall up, I keep you at a distance. And in the process of keeping you at a distance, and if you ask me questions, I make stories up. And if I'm a big fan of the work of Joe Dispenza. He said 50% of what we tell people, what we remember, it isn't even accurate. So we even biologically, brain science wise, don't remember correctly. And so as I'm telling things and as I'm not showing up and I'm faking it till I make it, I'm digging myself deeper and deeper into a hole because I'm out of alignment with myself. I'm out of alignment with you, and I'm out of alignment with the world. So I continue to go into this dark spiral. So then what do? I start beating myself up more, and I start torturing myself more versus getting out of that hole and getting onto, from sucking to being successful.
I like that. Again, someone once said to me, people want to see your scars, not your gaping wounds.
Right.
So when I heard you say being a little bit vulnerable, that reminded me of that. Instead of showing your gaping wounds, showing my scars, but somewhere in between, where, in other words, you don't have to fall apart on people.
Oh gosh,
to
no,
to to
no.
say to because vulnerability, people will associate vulnerability with, I'm going to be Brene Brown and I have to open my chest to everybody. No, it's just saying, look, I'm really not sure about this decision. Can you help me with this?
Right.
Right? Can I run these things by you so that I can get clearer on myself? Or I don't really feel like I have the confidence to go speak at this conference. Can we work on this? That's being vulnerable and getting the help that you need.
And what that does is it engages the help you need. And if you've got someone's preparing you for a speech and you're getting feedback from them and they laugh at the part you want them to laugh at, and then your next part, they don't laugh, that's something to pay attention to versus I am the oracle. Everything flows through me. I am the be all and the do all. That's how I used to conduct myself. That's how I would show up. And when I showed up that way, what I found is it created a lot of artificial harmony in my life. I had a lot of, acquaintances, but
Artificial harmony. We could do a whole podcast on
yeah.
artificial harmony.
And what I wanted are deep relationships. What I wanted are connecting conversations. And if we're going to have a connecting conversation, I have to show up and be real. And so as leaders, during tough times, during great times, if we show up and we're real, and part of what I was coaching in 2020 was telling leaders, show up, be real. And if you don't have all the answers to the pandemic issues or to PPP loans or the EIDL monies coming in or what have you, say it. And then say, I'm working on it. Help me work on it, Mark. Help me come in. Let's work on it. What do you see? How can I do it? Let's engage a community. Let's bring in people as compared to, I got this, I got this, I got this, when really we don't have it.
Oh, so good. So you touched about the fact, we're recording this in the middle of the pandemic. We're actually coming to the end of the pandemic, hopefully, even though deaths are at record rates. We got the vaccine. The end is in sight. But in the book, you actually treat the COVID piece from the future a little bit, where you say, remember when we were at the COVID pandemic in 2020, and we were in crisis. And you teach people how to use that crisis to handle whatever crisis they're doing in 2023, 2025, whenever they read the book. Can you talk about that a little bit?
So from my perspective, we ultimately, I think we can look at things, some mistakes, issues, things that happen to us. When I'm $600,000 in debt, for example, I did that. I have to own that. For a long time, I didn't. I blamed everybody else and like a masterful shuffler of the cards. But once I owned it, then it happened because of me. Something like a COVID, something like a recession happens to me. That's how my brain processes it. If I can pivot that thought process into something not happening to me, but happening for me, that's where the magic can happen. There's a story I got to tell you, and I think it'll bring it home because it's not in the book yet. So my coach, Dr. Danny Friedland, wrote the opening of my book. In November of 2020, Danny was diagnosed with stage 4 brain cancer. He's a medical doctor by training. He is a brain surgeon by training. So when they told him what cancer he had, the stage 4 it was at, he knew his runway was shortened significantly. He's a young guy. 3 days after he got the diagnosis, he called me as a client. I've been with him 7 years, and he was buoyant. And he tells it to me. I broke down. I
Sure.
felt the pain. I mean, he's one of my foxhole friends. He's one of my go-to people in my tribe. And I said, how are you? I don't put on a brave face for me. We have an authentic relationship. He goes, I'm not putting on a brave face. I suffered for 2 days. I had a lot of pain around that. And I've just decided that cancer is going to be the defining moment of my life. This is happening for me, not to me. And let me tell you how I'm going to live the rest of my life. If we can remember and we can recognize, for a lot of businesses, a lot of business owners, once something happens to us, we have a choice on what to do with it. Danny's got stage 4 cancer. He's got 15 to 36 months. He's going to live every single day to the very best of his ability to leave a legacy and to make an impact for people like me, for people in your audience. He's got a whole YouTube channel now running. It's literally become his, because he calls it his Netflix series. Every day he puts a new video out there to make a difference in the world and to leave a legacy. As entrepreneurs, we have that same opportunity. We do control our destiny on some levels. Now, someone could be listening from the restaurant industry, for example, saying, my business has been shut down through no fault of my own. The government won't let me reopen. I totally understand that. Why did you get into hospitality? That's the first question I'd ask a client. What caused you? And have them tell me the stories about being of service and the joy of cooking and the joy of serving others. Then the pivot becomes, where else can you apply that same joy? Where can you put your why elsewhere? Versus, the people who beat themselves up, the people who should all over themselves. What can we do? Because like Stockton,
or the great one, this shouldn't be happening.
Yes, this shouldn't be happening. Well, if you've ever been in a car accident that you didn't create, that shouldn't be happening either, but it did. So this is your brutal reality. What we have are some choices once we deal with that reality. And deflecting and not owning that doesn't allow us to feel empowered. And so much of what I did, what I wanted to accomplish in that part of the book was have people feel empowered. Deal with your reality, but feel empowered that somehow, some way you will get through this. Somehow, some way you will survive this. And some way, somehow, if you choose it to be, it could be one of the defining moments of your life.
So chapter 4 is the 4-step process on how to do this. Give us the 4-step process.
So the 4-step process it's really an active learning cycle. So I'll use myself as the example. I think it's fair as compared to using a client. So I'm $600,000 in debt. That is my brutal reality. I have to have somehow.
We're talking about the past. He is a very successful coach, and you do want to hire him. This is the past.
Yes, thank you very much. So the brutal reality is I'm $600,000 in debt back in 2006. For context, so I decided filing bankruptcy wasn't an option for me. So what I decided to pivot into from there was somehow, some way I'm going to get out of debt. So the first thing was being in debt no longer worked for me. That's step 1 of the 4-step process. Step 2 is I created an intention around the debt. My intention is I want to get out of it. I did not have an expectation of when or how. That's key, because then I'm able to access the front cerebral cortex part of my brain, not be in fight or flight. Step 3 is I created a strategy around the intention to get out of debt. And in that strategy, we tried a bunch of different things. This is when I replaced my staff. I brought in new people. I hired for DNA, not for resume. So they were super coachable because they're brand new and they're working for Willy Wonka in the chocolate factory. And we're throwing a bunch of crazy ideas against the wall to see what sticks. So we tried a bunch of different things. We kept what worked and what didn't. So in step 4, it's you try massive amounts of things. You get help, you iterate, you pivot, you go to whatever's necessary, and then you repeat the process and you put everything back at the top of the hopper. So the next day is my intent. So what's not working for me? Still being in debt doesn't work for me. What's my intention? I'm going to find a way to get it, and just keep iterating that process. What that did is it kept me in a very creative mindset, which to kind of conclude for people who didn't hear the first episode, landed us on the Inc. 5000 6 times in one of America's fastest growing companies. And we got out of debt within 8 years. If I had said in the beginning in 06, 8 years later, I'm going to be out of debt or I'm a failure, well, that's limiting. I'm going to be out of debt somehow. And the inflection point and learning opportunities and the pivots that we learned along the way, 1, I put in the book, but 2 is I coach my clients now when they're stuck in chaos and crisis and they don't see the forest around that tree. We have to pull them back a little bit as coaches and help people see where the opportunity and the possibility lies. And I do that by using that 4-step process.
Nice. Actually, we'll come to a close with this really cool distinction, and you used it in the 4-step process. Is the difference between intention and expectation?
Intention is open. So let's go back to an expectation. An expectation is win or lose. I expect to either do something or I don't. It's either a win or a lose. If I have an intention around something, that gives me play. It gives me room to play. It's versus the musician who just plays the notes versus the musician who plays jazz. When we play jazz, There's room to breathe between the notes, and we can pivot and move to where the feelings take us and where the emotion takes us. No different than in business. If my intention around this business is open, ultimately where I wanted to find, going back to the recruiting business, I needed to find that increased demand and a diminished supply of human capital. In there, I needed to be able to pay debt. So how did I do that? I need to get paid faster and get paid more. If I laid all that out over the course of time as we found those different steps. We didn't fail when we tried something new. We learned. So being intentional allows me to learn, not shut myself down with fear and self-doubt.
Yeah, what a great distinction. It just changes the game. Everything in this book changes the game, because what you do is you really bring real world process, real world entrepreneurship skills with the humanity that underlies it. So we can get, because we're just humans running these businesses, right?
Oh, for sure.
And it doesn't matter what kind of business. I have a coaching business, and I'm taking things out of the book, and oh wow, I can do this and I can do that. And whether, or you've got a hardware store, like, it really doesn't matter. So,
It's the application is universal. That's the design of the book. It's not for just staffing companies or coaches or manufacturers. It can be applied anywhere. And what we dropped in through the stories, not just my story, but we brought in Brian Scudamore from 1-800-GOT-JUG. I use Barbara Corcoran from Shark Tank. I use Tom Schwab from Miniview Valet. I use Jackie Smith from Coventry Creations. I use all these different examples of different sectors, of different businesses where these things apply, so that if you're in manufacturing, retail, restaurant, there's a story in there that applies to you.
nice. So this is one of those books that I'm full throated telling people to just go buy. From Suck to Success: A Guide for Extraordinary Entrepreneurship. What's the date that it comes out?
Pre-launch is going to be February 9, and then a hard copy to come after that.
So this is going to be airing in February. We're in January now recording this. It'll be airing in February. So let's coordinate, and we'll put this out when you need it to support the book.
Oh,
And
thank you so much.
We'll have the links in the show notes so people can go and buy the book.
Oh, thank you so much.
Meanwhile, where can people find you?
So people can reach me at extraordinaryadvisors.com. Anybody who's heard me today, as a thank you to Mark and his audience, and I know his goal in coaching is to make a difference in the world. If anybody's heard anything that I talked about that you want to talk to me about one-on-one, 30 minutes of my time for free, no cost, I'm not going to try to sell you the book on the call. And I'm happy to talk to you about being unstuck. So just email me, Todd at extraordinaryadvisors.com, and I'll get back to you. We'll get you on the calendar, and we can talk about whatever is holding you back.
All right, guys, I want you to make him really, really busy, because there's thousands of you. So please, just overwhelm him so he knows how popular I am.
There
Todd,
you go. Good problem for both of us to have.
Right. Todd, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate who you are and what you bring.
Mark, thank you, brother. I really appreciate who you are as well, and I appreciate you for having me back on.
To everybody else, again, I just in awe of your precious time and attention. Thank you for sharing it with us. I love you. Have a great rest of the day.